Hello, everybody. It's Recotopia, episode 152. I'm Chris Atkinson, joined by Aaron Dicer.
Hidely ho, polar bearerinos.
That's right. That's right. And for those of you wondering where Jeremy might be, he's not here because of an Xfinity outage in the area. I even experienced this Xfinity outage, but I'm one of the rare people who own two internet service providers, and so I am able to go. Actually,
This is the reason. This is the reason you do it.
Yeah. Although my Xfinity did come back on just before this, so who knows? But if you ever wanted to know why Comcast is a sin, it was something similar to that happening one day. It was a Comcast Xfinity outage, and it took forever or whatever. Something happened with the customer service or whatever, and so like it just happened to be like the next week I did a Universal picture on a sins video, and I was like, Comcast 5 cents. Here you go.
Ding.
Today is today's big recommend is the Informant, and we'd like to once again welcome chat who have come out here to listen to us talk about movies on a Thursday today. I had stuff going on at my house that I was trying to avoid, but there's still stuff going on at my house. You know, who knows? You may hear a window breaking later on. I don't know. You don't know. But anyway, thank you, chat, for coming out. Let's get on to our small recommends.
I'm going to. Oh, go. Go for it.
I'll go ahead and kick us off. And this is a movie that I had sort of on my list of shame for a very long time. It's one of those all-timers. It's Jules and Jim, Francois Truffaut's movie about two unlikely friends who they have this sort of this unique relationship, and eventually the one Jules meets this girl played by I think it's Jean Moreau. I don't know. It's Jean Moreau. There's something French about it that I can't quite put on pronounce for it. But Jean Moreau, or Jeannie Moreau, or however you spell it, she is probably the highlight of this movie for me, even though it's not. The title is not about her. Her name is Catherine in the movie, but Jules is made out to be not good with women, and Jim is very good with women, but Catherine falls for Jules, but there's this kind of a throuple thing going on with this group. And you know what? The French just don't like love, man. The movies in the 60s that we hold in high esteem from the French New Wave and everything, it always seems like love is a problem. Love is or it's not a fairy tale. At least it's never a fairy tale. Let's put it that way. And it's one of those type of things where people make very mature decisions, like they don't let the emotions dictate what goes on in these things. And it's so interesting watching these movies back in the day. Anyway, this was a movie that was on my list of shame. I had never seen it, and I'm glad I did. I saw it on the big screen. It came here for a sort of I don't know, it's a restoration or something. I don't know. Sometimes it's a like a staff pick or something like that at a theater, whatever. But very awesome to have seen this on the big screen, and I would highly recommend it as well.
I've added it to my watch list. It's on my list of shame as well. In fact, Truffaut stuff is just, I'm so terribly blank on his canon. So I really need to especially with the way Hitchcock and Truffaut are mentioned together so much, and actually I have that book. I have the Hitchcock Truffaut book, but I've just never really gotten into the Truffaut movies, and I need to do so.
Yeah, and this is one of those movies where like there's not really like there's an overarching story, I guess, but it really is kind of like episodic, and there's like a point even where these two guys go off to war. So there's like a whole section where they go off to war for a while and stuff, and you're just kind of like living their lives and everything. So it's always fun to get into these French New Wave movies because they're just different. They have a different mindset from what we see in Hollywood romances and Hollywood friendships and everything like that. Anyway, recommend this if you've never seen it. It's one of those that always regularly gets into those all timer categories.
Speaking of directors with French names, I went back and watched Blue Ruin.
Oh yeah,
And this is Jeremy Saulnier,
yeah.
who, of course, is getting a lot of love for Rebel Ridge this last
Mm-hmm.
year. And I got this screener a while back, the year it came out, I think 2013. So now we're talking 12 years ago, which seems
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous that it's that far back.
Yeah.
And it's just been sitting there waiting for me to watch. I finally got around to watching it, and I can see the Jeremy Saulnier thing. Like, he really understands how to build tension in like real human situations. This is a story about, I guess, feuding families would be the easiest way to kind of summarize it. But the movie builds you into it gradually in understanding where the feud comes from, what's going on. I think the first 10, 15 minutes of this movie is almost a silent film in many ways, but it works, and you're getting invested in what's happening. The depictions of violence seem really authentic in this movie, the way that you would think they would happen in real life, not just like Rebel Ridge. They seem inauthentic in a way. They're hyper stylized, right? Like, the character has a level of expertise where it's just cool. And in this movie, the violence seems, pedestrian, and how somebody who maybe had never shot a gun before, would handle things. Not a lot of people I think you would necessarily know in this cast, but I think Macon Blair does such a good job with this central performance that it makes the movie. So this is really good stuff. High recommend.
And I believe he's in almost all the Saulnier movies. He's kind of a friend of his or whatever. I haven't seen this movie since around the time it came out, but I remember really liking it. The Jeremy Saulnier also did Green Room. Did you ever see that?
I did see Green Room. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's another one that's really, really good too. But yeah, I'll second this, even though it's been forever since I saw it. I just remember really enjoying it myself. So yeah.
Yep.
So now we're doing the unprepared part. We don't have any graphics for this type of stuff. And we just learned Jeremy wasn't going to be able to join us today, but I've got a second small recommend. And the other thing that the local Belcourt it does, and apparently I think they've done this, I don't know how long they've done this with the company that comes out with all these Oscar nominated shorts or whatever, but the Oscar nominated shorts, whoever distributes those all together so that you can see them all in one sitting, have been doing it for 20 years, I think, something like that. But one of the things that I always felt left out of during the Oscar telecasts is when they would come up to do the Oscar the short animated films and the live action shorts and the short documentary features or whatever. You see clips from it, and you're like, wow, that looks amusing, and then you'll never see that thing again.
Right.
And so I have done this one other year. I saw all the animated and all the live action, and I have seen the recent ones too that just went through our local theater. And I would highly recommend going to see these because there's some really good ones in there. I'll knock off some highlights. In the animated category, there's one called Wander to Wonder, which is about these, I guess they're like these claymation figures that this man has created, and he was making these like little shows with them and everything. But the man that was making those shows with them has died, unexpectedly passed away. But these three different characters are still alive somehow and still trying to turn on the camera and make shows for whoever it is out there that's watching the shows. And you see this, there's this weird, it's hard to describe, but there's this darkness. It's comic. It is darkly comic, but there's this, there's this thing. If you're just if you're just paying attention to what's going on the screen, you'll kind of get the darkness, but pay attention to the details of the background and everything that's going on in their world, like just the pigsty that they live in and everything. It's just it really paints a picture. There's another one I believe that's called Magical Candies that was in this category, about a kid who goes and buys these candies, and when he ever eats the candy with a certain flavor, with a certain color on it, it activates something in his world that communicates to him that you normally wouldn't be able to communicate with. The first one he pops in, it's the couch that starts communicating with him and saying, here's what please get this remote control out of my cushions and stuff like that. And there, I think generally across the board, all the animated features were good. There were a couple in there that were like so. One called Yuck, about very young kids learning the world of kissing, and like from going from making fun of it to actually wanting to do it and all that type of stuff. That one was pretty good, but highly recommend seeing the animated features. The live action features, most of them are issue driven, so they're very depressing, unfortunately. I mean, watch them because they're important things to know. One of them is called Aline, but I think it's Alien essentially. And they can't just call it Alien, I guess, because that's a franchise. But it's about people who are looking to get a green card to stay in the country, but then when they go to apply, that's when ICE comes in to crack down on them, and it's apparently something that happens quite a bit. That's one in there. There's one about a South African ranger who's like protecting rhinos from poaching and everything like that. This one was based on a real story, so you get to see actual images from it later on. The story that they tell here is harrowing. I won't tell too much about it. It's harrowing, but it also has a little bit of light in the darkness. But the one that you may have possibly even heard of in this group is called I'm Not a Robot, and where this woman who starts doing, like, is at work, has to do a CAPTCHA thing, and she's failing the CAPTCHAs. And when she fails the CAPTCHAs, she's like, what's going on with this? And the computer starts telling her, well, you might be a robot, and starts telling her all the different things that here's the reason why you might be a robot. And she's like, I'm not a robot. And then she becomes this sort of like this this existentialism type of thing, where it's like, where like she's like, I just denies it, but people are all around her saying, oh, we didn't know you'd find out this way, and all this other stuff. So it's a very interesting one as well. So if you get to see the Oscar nominated shorts, if they're going through your town, I would recommend that. They're most of these are just like, when they combine them, they're just like a regular short feature, like an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes. So good stuff. There you go.
Did they include the documentary shorts as well, or just animated in live action?
They are also showing the documentary shorts. I have not gotten around to watching those. I had a perfect alignment where they had the animation and the live action back to back on one Friday night, and I was able to just go ahead and knock them out on that one evening. Now they're all over the place, sporadic and everything, and like the documentary ones I'm not going to be able to see until like much later. So yeah. If I do get around to seeing them, but yeah, they're all playing all at once, usually at the same theater.
Interesting thing this year, the only live action or animated short there's only one that's from the US. All the others are from other countries, and it was the Aileen or whatever that is the only one that came from the US. So lots of great international stuff going on there. That's cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought for my other small recommend, I'd hit up the world of television, because I finally started watching and caught up on the debut season of a show called Paradise. This is Sterling K. Brown. It's hard to give kind of the synopsis of this show without kind of hurting the premiere episode. The premiere episode does some really cool things where it takes you in that episode and has some great surprises for you. I will say it is a kind of in the line of fire situation where we're dealing with a Secret Service agent for the President of the United States, who is played by James Marsden. And then the head of security is played by Julianne Nicholson, who is absolutely amazing in this. I also want to give a shout out to an actor I haven't really known much of named John Beavers, who plays Agent Williams in this show. I think that performance is really captivating and nuanced and interesting. So I will just say this movie is going to surprise you, but the surprises aren't the thing that's going to keep you coming back. It is going to be the performances and the, let's just say, mystery that's going on at the center of it. So, it's hard not to spoil a lot of it that, I think is really fun discovering during the pilot episode. So watch the pilot. I think you'll be hooked.
I've heard quite a bit from about this, and we were talking about this on the beforehand on the outtake stuff. Just like all these shows, it's the complaint I have is all the shows that I actually follow, and it's a narrow set, actually just come out at the same time apparently, and then somebody will say, "Oh, by the way, have you seen this TV series that you haven't even heard of yet? It's good too, and it just started." And it's like, man, come on. Dude, who has time for this? Aaron, how do you have time for this?
You just make time, I guess. I don't know. I have spreadsheets and apps, and there's never a moment where when it's time to do pop culture, there's never a moment where I'm having to decide anything. My spreadsheets have decided what I will put on the TV when it's that time. And so I just work my way through stuff. Kind of do it that way.
I mean, that's kind of what I do when it's time to watch all the movies for 2024 is I'm like just on top of each other, just like, and the problem is that you start thinking of plot details from other movies while you're watching these new movies, and you're like, but I thought they said this and that. And oh, that's right. That was the other movie that I was watching.
Yeah.
Shit.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that is on Hulu. By the way.
Oh, it's on Hulu. Okay.
Check it out. So, yep.
All right. Let's go on to the big recommend. And the big recommend is The Informant. Let's start off our synopsis here. The Informant is a 2009 movie directed by Steven Soderbergh, written by Scott Z. Burns, from a 2000 book by Kurt Eichenwald. The movie begins with a disclaimer that while everything is based on true events, they aren't trying to make a documentary here. So there, the movie says. After the opening credits, we are greeted with the voice of Mark Whitaker, played by Matt Damon, who tells us a lot of the things we enjoy are because of corn. He is talking to us, but he's also talking to his son while driving in a car. Whitaker's narration will constantly flow through this movie, regardless of its importance to the plot. We later find out he works for a little-known company called Archer Daniels Midland, or ADM, that nonetheless is a very important part of your day, whether you know it or not. Their specific business is to take dextrose out of corn and turn it into lysine, and they have the biggest lysine plant in the world. A helpful graphic tells us we're in Decatur, Illinois, and it's October of 1992. Today, Mark is concerned about a virus that's entered the manufacturing process and is giving them a lesser yield. They're going to miss a quota, and millions of dollars are at stake. He's been tasked by the boss's son, Mick Andreas, played by Tom Papa, to fix the problem. Back at home, Mark is having dinner with his son and his wife, Ginger, played by Melanie Linsky. She notices Mark is distracted and asks him about it, but he deflects and says she's looking pretty today. She also brings up something about buying a horse, which Mark also deflects by telling her and his son that they're now feeding Jumbo shrimp lysine, and asks if they might want to take a trip to Mexico someday. The dishonesty starts off early in this one. The next Whitaker narration is one of my favorites as he tells the audience that toro is not only a word bullfighters use, but is also a term that the Japanese use to name the best tuna sushi. Toro, raw fish. Who went first on that one? The guy without the grill. I've been to Tokyo. They sell little girl underwear in the vending machines right on the main drag, the Genza or whatever. Guys in suits buying used girl panties. How is that okay? That's not okay. Mark gets off the phone with a Mr. Nakawara from the Ajinomoto Corporation, and Mark tells Mick that Nakawara has admitted to sending a mole to infiltrate and sabotage ADM, and that they can pay $10 million to make it stop. Mick actually believes this story, but tells Mark that he wants a settlement for less money. He doesn't get much of a chance to do that, though, because ADM ends up asking their security guy, Mark Chevron, played by Tom Wilson of Back to the Future fame, to call the FBI and work with them instead. The FBI wants to record calls between Mark and Nakawara to prove the sabotage. Mark calls his wife to tell her how worried he is about talking to the FBI, and his wife gives him some great advice. Just tell the truth, which Mark doesn't and never does. He tells the FBI agent Brian Shepard, played by Scott Bakula, that Nakawara wants his $10 million wired to both Swiss and Caribbean bank accounts. Mark tells Brian that he thinks Nakawara might be getting suspicious and already wants to back down. Anyway, Brian wants to put a recording device on Mark's phone. When he gets home, he tells his wife that he couldn't tell the truth because Mark Chevron was in the room the whole time, as an even bigger lie has now started to form. Mark is now claiming that ADM is trying to cover up something sinister after Agent Shepard installs a recording device on Mark's ADM phone at home. And I got kind of confused with which was on which and whatever. But apparently he has a home phone for his business, but he also has a regular home line, something like that. Mark asks to talk to Shepard in his car because he believes ADM is bugging his house. Inside the car, he tells him that he was coached to say the calls from Nakawara were coming to him through his home line and not his business line. ADM is part of a lysine price fixing scheme around the world, and Mark has sat in on meetings that are strictly for price fixing, and that if the FBI were to look into Mark's personal phone records, he'd be the fall guy for any criminal charges. Mark then points the finger at his direct bosses, Mick and Dwayne and Andreas. Mark, of course, tells Chevron that the only thing that happened when the FBI came over was that they put a recorder on his phone. At the FBI, Shepard tells his bosses about the price fixing, and they appear to be taking everything he said seriously. Mark gets a call from his wife, and a little later, he bursts into Chevron's office and is upset that the FBI has not only tapped his ADM specific line at home, but his home line itself, claiming the phone company told his wife about it. Chevron isn't buying this bullshit, but tells Mark he'll look into it. But when Chevron asks Shepard about it, Shepard gives the cryptic, "I really can't answer that." This leads to Chevron and Mick Andreas to go into Mark's office and tell him they aren't going to cooperate with the FBI. While in that mini meeting, Shepard calls Mark to tell him that his supervisor wants to meet him. Mark pretends it's some sort of business call, and when he hangs up, he asks Chevron and Andreas what he should do if Shepard ever calls. When Mark talks to the FBI, he asked them about his phone lines being tapped, and he is assured that the only recorder was on his business line. But Shepard admits there was a trap and trace device on his home line that they could not listen to. And Shepard's boss claims responsibility for the phone company, telling Mark's wife that additional phones were tapped. Apparently, the FBI actually made a mistake that will work to inflate Mark's lies even more. Shepard's boss, played by Alan Havey, asks Mark why he's willing to do all of this, and he tells them that the company is doing things that he doesn't approve of. He's just an honest scientist, and suddenly he's being told to lie to everyone he knows so he can learn the business side of ADM. Given that Shepard's boss asked Mark if he's willing to wear a wire. Shepard sets up a recording on a motel payphone where Mark will call a Mr. Yamamoto to talk about price fixing. Shepard seems to be happy with the information Mark gives. Later, Mark tells with someone who owes him a favor and tells him to write down a name, Nordkron Kimmy. He goes on to an accounts payable office where he tells the guy there, played by Eddie Jemison, that he wants to hand deliver a check to a person in Switzerland for work on some new microbe. This is stuff we won't understand until later. We start seeing Mark traveling with a guy named Terry, played by Rick Overton. The next time Mark talks to Shepard, he claims that he can't get good tapes on anyone because everyone is scared and that ADM is doing everything by the book now. But Shepard says no matter what, they're investigating the price fixing. Mark keeps canceling meetings with the FBI, apparently hoping all of this will go away. Even if ADM has stopped the price fixing, Shepard wants a tape of a higher up saying so. When Mark asks how he can prove it to them, they hook him up to a polygraph, which he does not pass. Now, Shepard and his partner Bob Herndon, played by Joel McHale, are determined to learn everything Mark knows and what he's been lying about. Mark admits he lied about the mole inside ADM and that the price fixing is still going on, and not with just lysine. Mark is now full on wearing a wire, and if it's in any way possible, actually overshares on everything he sees and hears. But at the very least, he's getting the FBI all the price fixing info from all over the world that they need. Mark can't resist showing the guy who's building their horse stables the secret recording device he has in his briefcase, bragging that he's secret agent 0014 because he's twice as smart as James Bond.
And just for what it's worth, that should be single O 14.
Yep.
007. So.
Yep, but when it comes from the mouth of Mark Whittaker.
Yep.
The FBI sets up video surveillance for the next ADM meeting with the Japanese in California. After Shepard and Herndon get the footage, they show it to their FBI bosses, who don't feel like they actually got anything. So later they get another video where Mark is able to ask the whole room of price fixing plotters if they are in agreement, and that's what finally gives them the evidence they need. However, once again, Mark's motives are called into question considering the amount of money he makes at the company. Herndon shows one of the FBI guys a picture of Mark's family. They carry it around to remind them that this is a real person with a real family who's putting themselves on the line for a nobler cause. They want to know if the government will be behind Mark when the time comes, which is something that has apparently given Mark the idea that even ADM will want to reward him for his efforts later, since all the higher-ups will be gone and he'll be the only person left to run the company. Ginger rightly tells him that ADM will not want to have anything to do with him after this. The FBI sets up a raid, and Mark is told not to sign with any attorneys that ADM puts in front of him after these arrests happen, and to tell them that he has his own lawyer and he's cooperating with the government. When Mark asks if he'll still be in good standing with ADM, the FBI continues to throw gasoline on that fire by not entirely answering that question, as they know telling him what really is going to happen might make him back out at the last minute. At least that's what I interpreted anyway. After the raid, it is revealed that Mark, never one to make things easy, told one of the ADM guys about the raid well before it happened, along with his secretary. When asked if there's anything else they need to know, he says no. ADM brings their lawyers in, and one of them stays behind in Mark's office. Mark asks if he says anything about Mick and Dwayne. Does the lawyer have to tell them about it? Mark, of course, tells his ADM lawyer everything, and only after the fact does he tell ADM that he's going to get his own lawyer and that he'll be cooperating with the government. Mark hires James Epstein, played by Tony Hale, and even then he's still trying to sell the story of a mole at ADM that sabotaged the lysine production. He tells them what he and the FBI did over the last 2.5 years. Epstein tells him not to talk to anyone outside the room about the case, so of course Mark talks to the Wall Street Journal immediately, something that Shepard isn't happy with, nor his lawyer, who finds this out when he picks up a Wall Street Journal to read. And no matter what he's being told, Mark basically just ends up talking to everyone who will listen. Some of the stuff we saw Mark doing earlier in the film starts to come back to haunt him during the ADM audits, as they find out he's been forging checks at a rate that will start at a large sum of money but will hilariously increase as more information is uncovered. Despite his lawyer's wishes, Mark wants to talk to his FBI guys, who make sure to tell him that the arrangement is not like before and that they are not asking for information. But Mark eases them into a much larger conversation by asking if it's wrong to use company cars for personal use, and then dropping the hammer that he's been accepting company kickbacks to the tune of $500,000 and that he was receiving them even after he talked to the FBI. The kickbacks are his current cover, quote unquote, for his check forgeries. Just after that, the ADM lawyer, played by Clancy Brown, is saying Mark has stolen more like $2.5 million. This is what he presents to the FBI to soften their case against ADM. He is even willing to paint a picture that the FBI was in on it. While none of that is true, the perception will ruin their own case. Meanwhile, Mark tells his lawyer he only kept $1.5 million and that there's no way he's hiding even more information. Just before they're about to get on the elevators to talk to the FBI, Mark tells his lawyers he's not been 100% honest, and upstairs in the meeting is where he'll finally come clean. The FBI is dropping Mark as a cooperating witness in light of the new information, stating it's a breach of agreement. The FBI is interested in what crimes he's been committing at ADM, which puts him in front of a new special agent played by Patton Oswalt. Mark still wants to throw the Andreases under the bus for all the fraud he was taught by them. The FBI clearly doesn't believe the kickback story, as kickbacks are usually paid in cash and not by check. Mark believes he's a victim, just like Tom Cruise and the firm. When Shepard and Herndon tell him they can't talk to him anymore, Mark lashes out because he gave them so much over the last 3 years, and now he's being punished. Even his wife believes Mark is a victim. Also, Herndon now casually mentions the known fraud seems to have escalated to $5 million. But that's still probably not the extent of it, because he tells his psychiatrist that there are even more accounts. Even when the story advances to yet another FBI agent played by Paul F. Tompkins, Mark is trying to sell the kickback story. This leads to all the people Mark had doing favors for him getting visits by the FBI. The fraud number seems to now be at $7.7 million. The next thing we see, the lawyers are talking to the FBI. Mark is on the hook for 45 counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. And the amount has jumped to $9 million. Epstein tries to lay more guilt on the FBI for Mark exposing a price-fixing scheme and how much pressure that put him under. Mark now tries to fake a kidnapping, telling his wife about everything that happened, and this leads to more media attention. Epstein tells Mark that they're looking at 3 to 5 years and a plea deal for his crimes. Mark tries to heap more blame on the FBI, looking for a lawsuit against Shepard and making up a bunch of stuff that he did during the time he was an informant. More of Mark's lies are exposed when it's found that his parents are alive. And that was a thing he briefly mentioned earlier in the movie, was that his parents died and then he was adopted. Mm-hmm. More of Mark's lies are exposed when it's found that his parents are still alive and that he wasn't adopted like he told Shepard earlier. Though through Mark's narration, we are told that he made that up because of a Time magazine article saying that people who are adopted get a lot of sympathy and are treated better, and that it's really other people's fault for keeping the lie going. He has now hired a lawyer in a flowery shirt that will go along with everything Mark wants to do. He tells the FBI that there's a master puppeteer, and that person is Brian Shepard. Mark has a letter from his psychiatrist that confirms that Shepard had put Mark through a lot of physical and emotional distress. Somehow, this leads to Shepard visiting Mark and his wife at their house, where Mark is detailing the psychiatrist's letter. And apparently, from what I can tell on the commentary on this disc, this is a conversation that Kurt Eichenwald, the writer of the book, had with Whitaker, not an FBI agent. So this is an interesting thing. But Shepard is ready to shut all of this down, telling Mark that the area code on the letter didn't exist when it was purported to have been written. When Mark says that maybe the stationery was ordered early, Shepard tells him that the announcement of the new area code came 6 days after the letter's date. It's here that we get to see Mark cycling through more lies in his head. There's got to be a way. Talk to the Fortune magazine writer who confirmed that the letter was real. But Shepard talked to the psychiatrist and confirmed he never wrote the letter, and that patient-doctor confidentiality doesn't extend to forgeries. And when Mark tries to legitimize it one more time using Fortune magazine, even his wife isn't buying this shit. Shepard then asks, "Why do you keep lying?" Mark, now completely exposed, says, "Well, I think maybe I should go back to the hospital." Judge Tom Smothers presides over the court case, where Mark makes a statement where he apologizes, but it's still clear he's not all the way there to fully being contrite. The judge, stating that there's really no way to know when this guy is telling the truth, sentences him to 9 years in prison. Next scene, he's looking for a pardon. He's still going off about Mick and Terry and how they only got 3 years for their crimes. He retracts his lies about Shepard and tells another one about how ADM put him up to it. He's apparently gotten 3 degrees while in prison, which is probably more bullshit. He says the president should consider the $1 billion in fines he's gotten for the government since he talked to the FBI. Herndon apparently helped Mark with his pardon case. And when he goes to talk to Mark, Mark slips that maybe he stole $11.5 million. Herndon asks him about it and even mentions that ADM now thinks he was the mole all along. But did he steal 9.5 or 11.5 million? And Mark says, I don't know, Bob. You tell me. A what happened then set of texts come up on the screen explaining that all the funds were found, that Mark finally admitted it was his idea to embezzle the money. ADM paid over $500 million in penalties and under new management. In 2006, Mark gets out of jail to a loyal wife, and that as of the movie's release was COO and president of operations at Cypress Systems. And oh yeah, he never got that presidential pardon. All right, Aaron, what do you think of this movie?
Oh, it's so funny. This movie is so funny for so many reasons. Soderbergh is such a talent at understanding tone and even how psychologically to use like so many comedians in roles in this movie, to even if the lines they're saying aren't funny, like it adds to this comedy of errors just to see people like Patton Oswalt or, Paul F. Tompkins or, the Smothers Brothers are both in this movie, which just, legends. I used to listen to Smothers Brothers LPs like when I was a child because they were my dad's LPs, right? Like, so he used to listen to the Smothers Brothers in the 60s. And then, I used to listen to those LPs when I was growing up, and so to see them in this was really fun. So I just think there's a lot of great work going on here. The narration in this movie is exquisite because many times, you will think of narration as a bad thing, and there's a reason for this because it's lazy exposition. Right? Like it's often used to not have to show us something, just instead of showing us, just tell us. It's easier that way. This narration is non-expositional. It is not, for the most part, it is mostly character driven. It is about telling us the kind of person that he is, the kind of way his brain works, the fact that while all of these crazy things are happening and all of these lies that he's telling us are happening, he's thinking about polar bears and how they have black noses and how that seems like a lot of thinking for a polar bear to have to figure out it has a black nose. Do they look in the reflection of the water? Did a different polar bear tell them they had a black nose?
That line in the middle of all that, if not for that, I'd be invisible. I mean, it just cracks me up every time.
Or the butterfly conversation, or all those kind of things that kind of speak to chicken soup for the soul. It sounds meaningful, but how is it applying to your life? Kind of stuff. And it's an indication that this person, how they think of themselves. They think of themselves as a deep thinker. They think of themselves as somebody who is above, this other stuff that's going on. And yet we see in the actions the complete disconnect from reality that brings. I think what we're dealing with here that the movie is showing is a type of narcissism, right? It feels like a narcissism personality disorder where you put yourself in the center of these grand stories as the hero, right?
Yeah.
And to see how ridiculous that is to everybody else is the humor of this movie and the sadness of this movie. And not to get overly political, but there are certainly people in our lives today that have similar narcissistic disorders that result in similar kinds of just creating truth with the words they say. I say it, so it must be true. Kind of thing. And so just there's an underlying sadness to this movie that is that I think just as powerful as the humor. Another thing that I found interesting this time through was to think of the fact that in most movies, you will have a character who has to be manipulated to do these things. So people are telling them things, gaslighting them a little bit, telling them, the truths they want to hear. And this movie is like, this guy gaslights himself. This guy, he
Mhm.
doesn't need manipulated. He's just gonna do it. The best example, the most hilarious example to me in this movie is the meeting with the lawyer from his company, where he's like, just starts by going, so you're my lawyer, and whatever I tell you, you can't, and then just tells him everything. And
Yeah.
and then they come out to the other bosses, and he's like, we've decided that I need to find my own lawyer. And the lawyer's
Yeah.
like, yes, we agree on this. But he's already told this guy everything, and it's just
Yeah.
like he's so clueless, and it's so funny.
Mhm.
So yeah, I found that really interesting this time. And then also I think you mentioned the hypotheticals scene where he's like, just so hypothetically, if it was a company car and I used it for normal things, and just the looks on like Joel McHale's face as he
Mm.
just
Mhm.
continues to build this hypothetical. It's
Mhm.
just great. It's just great. This is just a great watch. It's interesting. It's fun. And I always have a good time with it. So yeah, I was glad to watch it again.
Yeah. What I understand, this started out as was they didn't have all of that narration in the script at first. When Scott Z. Burns was starting to adapt this, it was kind of like the Insider, and Steven Soderbergh had no interest in making another The Insider because he felt like that was the pinnacle of a whistleblower type of movie.
Or Aaron
Uh,
Brockovich, he's done it a couple
yeah,
times, right? Like,
yeah.
yeah. So
And that was another interesting thing too, is that Soderbergh apparently didn't want to talk to anybody in the real story for this movie. He said that he did it for Aaron Brockovich before, and he says, like, I don't want to have somebody's like um story like sort of paint the picture of what I'm trying to do here. So I just want to take the facts, and apparently everything here has some sort of basis in reality, even if it didn't happen the way that it did in the movie or whatever. But I thought that was interesting. He approached this saying, I don't want to talk to anybody on this. I don't want to like have their narrative color what I have in my head about what this story is and everything. So I thought that was really interesting. But yeah, the narration wasn't a part of it until they sent Scott Burns back to like try to make it funnier or whatever. And he had, I don't know how many of these things were like there's several of these things are actually based in stuff that Whitaker said to Kurt Eichenwald during the book being made. So a lot of the stuff was in there. Now the one Nolan in the chat mentions the tie story, which is like you have a same pattern of tie as me, only everything is reversed or whatever, and the guy died. That is apparently a true story. A true story. Now that's according to Burns, and I don't know where that, I if I can send you somewhere to find where that actually happened, but that's what he says in the commentary, was that as an actual story. But a lot of the stories about what Whitaker are saying, like he does believe that the story about saving someone in Japan choking on a chicken bone was real, but like there were a lot of other things in there where it was just trying to get into the inner workings of his mind, and you can see uh what what kind of distracts him. And apparently that's a I did not realize this, that kind of like distraction, this kind of like thought process and everything is an aspect of bipolar disorder, and I had no
mm-hmm.
idea that that was part of it. You only hear the surface level of what bipolar is. I'd never heard that was an aspect, was that you get kind of like easily distracted and start inventing or thinking through these things in the way that it's kind of presented in this movie. But
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, it was also fun to see this movie finally with subtitles and everything. I believe the first few times I watched this, I wasn't entirely sure what was going on exactly and what was true and what was not. Like when at first when he's talking about like when he's talking about the mole and everything, we don't know, that gets kind of easily forgotten that he makes that story up too right off the bat, and a lot of people do believe that he really was the person who set that in motion so that he could get this whole thing where like, oh, someone's calling in a ransom and they need $10 million and they need to put it in these Swiss and Caribbean bank accounts. That's something that a lot of people believe Mark did invent. And they said that yeah, that whole thing with the virus and everything went away after all of this started, and everything just magically went away. They didn't like change anything or anything. So a lot of people believe he was part of that. But when they start talking about the price fixing, even like I was sitting there going, is that true? Is that a real thing? Or is this just more of the lie he's telling? And that's the thing. There's a lot of like stuff that's actually true in this. The price fixing thing was a true thing. But like when you mix it in with all the other stuff that Mark is lying about in this, you start wondering, well, is that even something that happened? Of course, then these guys went to jail over it, so yeah, that was a thing that was going on. But it's crazy how big this lie snowballs because of just once you get to a certain point, there's no turning back on this unless you just finally just say, all right, this is what I was up to. And I don't think he ever did uh say fully what he was up to. And I don't know if the real person, neither Scott Burns or Soderbergh actually talked to the real Mark Whitaker. So nobody, and I don't think Kurt Eichenwald got the full 100% truth either. But we kind of know what he did on all of this. It was a big grand scheme to embezzle $10 million and pay for his horse ranch, basically, when it comes down to it. So, and just live an extravagant lifestyle that people making $350,000 a year wouldn't be able to do. But anyway, I am glad that you enjoyed it. It's too bad we didn't have Jeremy here. I know this is one of his favorite movies, and I would have loved to have heard his thoughts on this one. But I think we're going to go on to the super secret double feature.
Sure. My brain immediately went to a few places that it did not eventually land, but immediately went to like Catch Me If You Can, which I think has been mentioned in the comments. Mm-hmm. Another kind of liar, but the tone didn't feel exactly right there because there's just something different about the person at the center of it. I also thought of Burn After Reading as a possible double feature here, but I eventually landed on American Hustle.
Yeah,
what's going on in this, and also the tone of the people who are executing what's going on. And there's a lot in American Hustle which I need to watch again. I remember being really mixed on it the first time I saw it, but man, that cast is so stacked, and I think I need to give this another second shot. But I remember feeling the same way during American Hustle as during The Informant, which is these people, some of them are so inept, and it is so hilarious, and it is so funny to see some of the ways they approach this con. So yeah, American Hustle is where I ended up landing.
And I've seen in the chat Shattered Glass being pitched.
Oh, sure.
And that would be a perfectly good one. But man, I'll tell you what, I'd be exhausted watching these movies back to back because the lies and the level and the extent that they go to lie about the things that they're doing is like, especially Shattered Glass, man. The guy is dead to rights, and he's just sitting there. And and so is Mark Whitaker in this one, but like, the guy is dead to rights, and he's still trying to he's oh my god, I can just imagine watching these movies back to back. It would be insane. But I think American Hustle is a good pick.
Another one I thought of, if I wanted to go with another Soderbergh movie, a recent one that I think has flown under the radar, and I think I've mentioned recently, is The Laundromat. The Laundromat has a similar kind of feel to it as well.
I never saw that one.
So, and Meryl Streep is incredible in it, and I think it's worth a watch. Again, a lot of these recent Soderbergh movies have just kind of flown really under the radar.
Yeah.
But it kind of has a lot of similar feel. So I almost went with that one as well, but thought I'd throw it out there.
Yeah. And a lot of people are asking if we can get Jeremy's thoughts on outtakes. We don't have anything for. I mean, he hasn't been here at all, so like we won't have anything for that, unfortunately. And it'll just have to be us two. We'll have to be enough for you guys. Sorry about that.
Our deepest and sincerest apologies for not being Jeremy today.
That's correct. All right. Next week, which is just in a few days, actually, it'll be next Tuesday. We are going to do our best of 2024 show, and or just the year in review, essentially.
Mhm.
We'll be talking about some bad movies in there as well. I am currently catching up to as much of the tapestry of 2024 as I possibly can. Aaron has already seen all of these movies at some various points and stages, and so it'll be interesting. I'm probably gonna ask you, Aaron, for some movies that I haven't seen, and you tell me which ones I should see before we do this podcast. But I have organized. I'm pretty sure I got most of the best ones in there right now, and there's just a couple. There's a couple of them that I definitely need to still see. But that's going to be what we're doing next week. I know that people were asking last week about this when we announced that we were doing this show. Are you going to do the after show again, where you talk about movies that are not covered?
Sure. I love that. Yeah, that's fine. You usually throw that in the outtakes, I think. Like, yeah, after we do the show proper where we hit as many as we can, I will stick around and specifically answer chat movies that weren't mentioned. So like if something we didn't mention that you really wanted to, hear a thought on or whatever, I'll stick around and answer what I can. So yes, I will absolutely do that again. That's always a lot of fun. So,
yeah. And someone is Nolan says, Chris, feel free to skip Amelia Perez. Unfortunately, I have not. I have not skipped. I will be watching. I mean, that's the thing about these shows. I definitely watch all the Oscar contenders for the major awards. So I've seen all of those. In fact, right now, the only thing I haven't seen Oscar nominated is like one cinematography thing, one costume thing, and the documentary short features. That's the only thing I haven't seen in the Oscar.
Well, you're beating me because I haven't seen any of the short features. I haven't seen any of the animated ones, and then the live action ones that you were already talking about. So, so yeah, you're ahead of me in that regard.
Yeah,
sure.
I even covered all the animated features. I finally got all those done, and well, not all as far as Oscar nominated ones I have. But there's still like a couple out there from the regular year that weren't nominated that I haven't seen, leading me to watch Moana for the first time ever. I had never seen Moana, and I want to see Moana 2, but right now that's kind of proven difficult for me. But I wanted to see that one before I saw part 2. I've heard part 2 is trash, but I want to see it anyway since it's part of the year. But anyway,
yeah, sure.
that's what our show will be when we come back on Tuesday. Still not certain, by the way, if Jeremy will be back for that one. There's other various things going on there, so it might be just us again, guys. I don't know if that's okay with you guys, but we might
we'll do everything we can to have it be the three of us. But yeah, we'll see how it all works out.
That's correct.
You mentioned Amelia Perez. I just want to share this one story because it's a unique thing that happened this award season that I've never had happen before. Where I got because they'll send like posters and autographed posters and that kind of stuff, and they sent this really beautiful like autographed Amelia Perez poster, and for the first time ever, I was like, I don't really, I'm not really gonna put this on my wall.
Yeah,
like I just didn't like the movie that much. And usually in those situations, it's like, oh, let's find a place for this. And in this case, they're just like, yeah, this one will sit in storage, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, there's like so it'll be a good conversation piece at
Yes,
some point.
yes, exactly.
Look how beautiful this thing is that I would have all the shame in the world of putting in my up on the wall. So,
Yeah.
uh, but yes, I'm looking forward to it. This is the time of year where I'm like stacking movies all over the place, and I've watched some brilliant ones. I think there's some that definitely should have gotten nominated over that.
Hmm.
But in any case, that is next week's episode. Anyway, all right. Well, that's going to do it for this week. Once again, chat, thank you guys for coming out. Appreciate it very much. Very much appreciate that. Yeah, and I guess that's going to be it. We'll see you
All
next
right.
time.
We'll see you
See ya.
guys. Bye.
Bye.